As he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. The Episcopal Church recently released its annual Fast Facts report, a statistical report based on the parochial report for 2017. And the report told the now familiar story of the slow but steady decline of the Episcopal Church. Average attendance dropped about 2.4% since 2016. Total membership dropped about 2%. And we're losing congregations at the rate of about 2 a month across the church. The only really good news in the report was the continued increase in giving across the church, up about 1.7% over 2016. The average pledge in the Episcopal Church is now $2,873. Despite that, the Fast Facts report is fairly gloomy reading. Now contrast that bit of news with the news from General Convention. I've attended General Convention since 1988, and this was by far the most energetic, the most unified, the most public, the least contentious, best feeling General Convention I've been part of. We dealt with tough stuff: the Me Too movement, the detention and splitting of families seeking asylum, gun violence in America, the revision of the Book of Common Prayer, Israel and Palestine, and much more. And yet, despite this, there was greater harmony, greater focus on God's mission, on the work of evangelism and reconciliation than I've seen before. Now, part of this, no doubt, had to do with the passing of the baby boomer power block. The General Convention, like our federal government, is a seniority system. And the baby boomers have led the church for a long time. My generation has done much good work, and we have also fought the now too familiar battles over human sexuality and public policy. But this time, 2/3 of the deputies at this convention were either first or second timers. The baby boomers did not control the votes at this convention, and that made a difference in the substance and tone of our conversations. Part of it also was the report of the Special Task Force on Sexual Harassment and Abuse, which called us to new awareness of the misuse and abuse of power in our church. And part of it was the heightened tension related to the separation of refugee families, which dominated the news last July. But most of it had to do with our presiding bishop, Michael Curry. Michael transformed the General Convention from a party for church geeks to a celebration of the Jesus movement. There was a large public witness remembering the mass shootings at Marjory Stoneham Douglas High School of Parkland, Florida. There was a caravan of more than 40 buses to a nearby ICE detention center to offer support to asylum-seeking women held there. Both, I would note, with full and public cooperation with local and federal authorities. There were joint sessions of the House of Bishops and House of Deputies educating us about the presiding bishop's priorities of evangelism, racial reconciliation, and environmental stewardship. There was a service of repentance and reconciliation for women and men who have experienced sexual abuse in the church. There was a large public revival service held in a public event center. And there was finally a program designed to help Episcopalians recenter their lives on Jesus. The way of love is the theme for this convention, and will be used throughout the coming triennium in the congregations of this diocese and across the whole church. What a contrast, what a contrast. The fast facts and the way of love. The fast facts are important. We can't be naive. The downward cultural and economic pressures the church faces continue unabated. The rising generations are deeply suspicious of large institutions, including the church. And we continue to wrestle with the fallout of aging congregations and a wobbly economy. And yet, as Michael Curry pointed out to us over and over again, the true test before us is neither cultural nor financial. The true test is spiritual. Will we follow Jesus? Will we make the way of Jesus the center of our lives? Will we treat others with the love and respect offered to everyone Jesus encountered? What matters, said our presiding bishop, is our faithfulness. That's the measure God cares about. Ours is a resurrection faith. And if God is calling our old church to die so that a new one may be born, then so be it. Our task, wherever we are, is to remain faithful and to follow the way of love. As Michael notes, the way of love is Benedictine spirituality recast in contemporary language. Benedict, you may recall, was a 6th century monk who wrote the first widely adopted rule for monastic life. It is characterized by moderation and flexibility, and it has been the root for many rules of life ever since. The way of love invites us to contemplate 7 practices for bringing Jesus into the center of our lives. It invites us to consider what we are already doing, how we might undertake new practices, and most importantly, whom we would invite to accompany us on our journey. Christianity is not a solo practice. It is community-based, and the participation of at least one partner who will accompany us and keep us honest is critical. How we can make the way of love the primary shape of our lifestyles as Episcopalians and Christians is the question before us. And we're going to explore the Way of Love program later this morning in our area caucuses. Now, I think we all know what this is about. We've been talking about it for a long time in Maine. This is about adaptive change, about adapting our historic traditions and beliefs into forms and styles for these times. As a diocese, we've tried to be institutionally flexible so new forms of church life can emerge. The Way of Love provides a spiritual foundation for adaptive change. And speaking of adaptive change, I thought it might be helpful to share a few stories about how we're doing. I recently visited St. Thomas's Wynn for the celebration of their 150th anniversary. Wynn was a riverboat stop along the Penobscot when Bishop Neely was the 2nd bishop of Maine. And it was here at Wynn that Bishop Neely started the Penobscot, later the Central Maine Mission, in 1868. The going was tough. Bishop Neely traveled by steamship from Portland to Bangor. Then by riverboat, Bishop Neely traveled by steamship from Portland to Bangor. Then by riverboat to Wynn. Then on foot or horseback in the area, and by stagecoach to Calais. The first rector in Wynn had no place to stay, and so in the manner of the times, Bishop Neely bought a rectory for the rector, the house next door to the church. And because it had a rectory, Wynn became the seat of the Penobscot Mission, the place from which many churches were planted over a number of years, from Brownville to Holton. I learned in preparation for the 150th that times were always tough, in the Central Maine mission, which continued, by the way, until 1986. There were never enough people, enough money, or enough clergy. Conditions were harsh. Clergy lasted only a year or two. Wynne has had 45 priests in 150 years. And one of them was there for 28 years. So most clergy have been in Wynne a year or two at the most. And of course, it was all based on work in the woods. And the working population ebbed and flowed with the work in the woods. Congregations were planted and then disappeared, and other congregations were planted. But all through the years, the desire to follow Jesus remained strong, right down to today. And ways were found to provide for clergy leadership, even if it meant circuit riding or other patterns of non-resident clergy. The 150th celebration of St. Thomas Wynne, which currently shares two retired priests in a sort of tag team priest-in-charge structure, gives me hope that we can rediscover possibilities that we already know, that we will live into our history and discover possibilities and patterns for clergy leadership that may be helpful in our own time. At this convention, we will welcome Emmanuel Lutheran Episcopal Church, a new federated congregation, which will become a full member both of this diocese and the New England Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We worked closely with the Lutherans in New England for some time now, and we have half a dozen collaborative projects in the diocese. This takes things a step further and is, I think, a sign of hope for the future. Bishop Hazelwood and I, Bishop Hazelwood of the New England Synod and I, are now talking about doing clergy transition in Maine together. And we're looking forward and considering where we might one day see other federated congregations. Emmanuel Church is the serendipitous outcome of an effort to preserve the ministries that were based at St. Mark's, Augusta. That church, unable to support a rector and in danger of going bankrupt, had service ministries that were so valuable that none of us could contemplate closing them down. So we searched for years for ways to sustain the ministries as St. Mark's transitioned to a new way of being. Many of you will recall that we engaged the 5 congregations of the Greater Kennebec in conversation for a couple of years. And during that time, the Lutherans joined in. Out of that happy circumstance and much, much hard work, Emmanuel Lutheran Episcopal Church has emerged. It is not something that any of us imagined in the beginning, but it is the most fortuitous ending. And those ministries, now called Bridging the Gap, continue to flourish. We will celebrate our union with Emmanuel after lunch. Our Living Local Joining God program is about to complete its 2-year run. Of the original 12 congregations, 7 have continued, and all have experienced some form of encouragement and revitalization as they have considered how to engage the community beyond their doors. St. Aidan's in Machias, one of the 7, has had a vision for engaging with the students at the University of Maine Machias for decades. But despite years of patient effort, nothing much worked. Recently, however, St. Aidan's began to provide comfort food and snacks during exams. It was a small matter, but much appreciated. It didn't bring any students to the church, but it did catch the attention of the administration. This fall, as the new students were being prepared for a day of community service, St. Aidan's was asked if it would like students to come and work on a project at the church. St. Aidan's, armed with the spiritual work of Living Local, said, "No, but we would like to accompany the students as they go out." I think that's just what Jesus had in mind when he said, "Follow me." Now, there are other stories that I could tell that I'd love to tell, but there's a time limit. Still, I want you to know that we are striving to be faithful, to love and care for God's people, and to do so moving beyond the ordinary constraints of our institutional lives. The key for our future, here as everywhere else, is to follow Jesus. Let me now turn to another matter before us in the Diocese of Maine. The election of the 10th Bishop of Maine is nearly upon us. In just 10 days, or thereabouts, the Standing Committee will release the slate of those proposed for your consideration. I'm very excited about this process. We began with a very strong list of candidates. There were 7 highly qualified participants in the retreat of the 7 finalists last week. And I'm anticipating that you will see a very solid list of candidates from which to discern our next bishop. With the announcement of the slate, however, responsibility for preparation will pass from the discernment committee into the hands of the voters. That's you. And it will be up to you to attend the walkabout, to visit the Bishop Quest website to learn about the candidates. The transition committee will provide ample opportunities for you to be prepared, but you will need to do the work. Later today, the Reverend Maria Hecker, President of the Standing Committee, will talk about the process going forward and what you can do to be spiritually centered and ready to vote at the electing convention in February. I firmly believe that the 10th Bishop of Maine will be invited to board a moving train and not push one out of the station. The Diocese of Maine is on the move. We are actively engaged in discerning God's mission, and we are seeking new ways to go about our work. I think the new bishop will find a very engaged diocese, full of people willing to try new things and collaborate together for the sake of Christ. I think we have our faces turned toward the future, where God awaits, and I am confident we will vote for a leader who will help us follow Jesus. In this in-between time, this liminal space that we're in, as we await the consecration of the 10th bishop, I must say that we at Loring House are feeling the change. Heidi Schott, our long-term communications officer, took a new position with the American Friends of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem in September. And not only did that remind us of the substantial change we're experiencing, Heidi was the voice of the diocese for 20 years, for 2 episcopates. Not only were we reminded that we're in the midst of change, but it's left us feeling a bit short-handed. The new communications people, John Hennessy, Mark Spar, Liz Inglesby, are working together well and coordinating their work. But the learning curve is steep. The learning curve, Heidi, it was easy for Heidi to have a conversation with herself about putting something on social media. It's a little harder when we have to say, oh yeah, we need to tell Mark there to get it up. So the learning curve has been steep for us. I'm feeling good about where we are. I think we've made some good progress, but we're still working out the details. And we've also recently appointed a new youth missioner, Reverend Sarah Nangio-White, who is helping us to adapt our youth ministry to this new time. We're doing our best to stay on top of the work and to respond to your needs, but I do appreciate your patience as our work is reconfigured and we too adapt to change. And I hope you will appreciate that this is a tender time for your staff. We have developed a close working relationship over these 11 years. We are friends as well as co-workers. And your staff is facing not only a change of bosses, but the loss of friends, and perhaps they are facing changes in employment. So please pray for us all and our chaplain, the Reverend Hannah Anderson, as we negotiate the changes ahead. This brings me to a final comment. I remember the period after I was consecrated your bishop. I was drinking from a fire hose, as they say. There were so many new things to learn. Did you know the Bishop of Maine is a corporate soul? I didn't know it until I sat in the chair. So many things to learn, and so many people to meet. And I was traveling to places I'd never been and worshiping with people I'd never met, week after week. And I was learning to be a bishop. I was full of energy and enthusiasm, but I actually didn't know what I needed to know. And inevitably, I made mistakes. I remember with some chagrin the first new program I rolled out. It was ill-considered, it didn't meet a genuine need, and it caused a lot of extra work for the staff. You were all very kind to me in that period. So please remember that your new bishop will not be perfect. We'll have a steep learning curve, and we'll make mistakes. And when that happens, don't get angry. Get close. Help that person learn to be the bishop we want and need. We are all shaped by our communities, and you are the community that will shape the new bishop. Kindness and thoughtful reflection will go a long way to smooth the days of transition and move us all to the kind of relationship we hope for with our next bishop. I continue to say daily prayers of thanksgiving for the ministry we have shared since 2008. Gretchen and I feel deeply blessed by the beauty of the land and the sea and the beauty of the people of Maine. We've begun to make plans to return to Rochester, New York, where we have lots of family and friends, but it will be difficult to leave all of you. With the transition committee, we are planning a couple of farewell events in May, which will include both a worship service and a reception. A time to praise God for all we have been able to do, and a time for personal conversation. Word about these events will be published soon. In the meantime, let us all remember that our lives are held in God's hand. God who is faithful and who will not let us fall. And may we all continue to walk in the way of love. Thank you.